I'm going to read, this is a reading from 1 John chapter 3, verse 1 through 2. And I'm just going to read this and talk a little bit about what the Bible says, what God says. And I know if anybody in here struggles with the Bible or with who God is, I'm just going to share this with you. And I know a lot of times what happens is when, even when I read the Bible, it's like, how does this play out in real life? And that's really the purpose of Daniel being here today as well. As I share a little bit, Daniel's going to share how this very much is a reality in his own life. So 1 John 3, see what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God, and so we are. The reason why the world does not know us is that it did not know Him. Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know that when He appears, we shall be like Him, because we shall see Him as He is. Some powerful words there, really powerful words. And when I hear that theme, remind me who I am, I think of my daily, everyday existence. I always need to be reminded of how God sees me. You know, in the 12 steps, prominent steps, 1 and 2, it's basically talks about how I'm powerless. And I talked about earlier how I believe I have a disease called sin, and that really ultimately makes me powerless. I cannot ultimately control everything in my life. And then the next step talks about only a higher power can restore me to sanity. And really the whole point behind all of that, and this isn't just a 12-step point, this is a biblical point, this is a reality of the world. I am powerless, and the only thing that restores me to sanity is by fixing my eyes, setting my eyes on a higher power. And the reality of life is that every single person has a higher power, whether they intellectually acknowledge that or not. And that higher power defines me. And so let me explain how this is. And some of those higher powers end up being good things, but because they become ultimate things, they become unhealthy. So, for example, I would define myself as a father, as a husband, as a pastor, as a friend, as a son, as a brother. I mean, I can go down the list of all the different ways I would define myself, okay? And I'm not using extreme examples of, like, addiction or anything like that on purpose, because I'm trying to help you understand that even those things can become unhealthy if seen in the wrong way. So as a father, it's a good title. It's a good identity. But if my kids become the ultimate thing in my life, how am I going to measure my self-worth? By how well I'm doing as a father and how they're doing. So if my kids are struggling or going through something in their life, how am I going to define myself? Bad father. That's who I am. You see? And it works out in so many different ways. And you can talk about extreme examples, and of course, of addiction or of things that you've done in your life. I'm defined as a, sexual predator. Okay? That's my definition, of course, then that gets applied to me. But that's an extreme example, okay? Whereas I'm saying that everybody in their lives has a higher power, and those higher powers will define us. And this is why, as a father, and as a husband, and as a pastor, and as a friend, and as a son, and as a brother, it's so important for me to remember that this is why me personally, every single day I wake up and my goal is to set my eyes on the hope that I have in Jesus. Hope. Jesus, outside of me. He is my higher power because He has done for me what I cannot do for myself. And He is the one who defines me. So when I set my eyes on Jesus and His love for me, then I start to see my own role in life in a healthier way. I start to see my role as a father, as a husband, as a pastor, and we all have those labels, okay? Those types of labels. I start to see them in a healthier way. I recognize that while I'm a father, and that's a good thing, I'm not defined by how I'm going to screw up, okay? So yes, I'm going to take some of those things on, and it's going to be tough in life at times, but I'm not ultimately defined by my children, okay? But yet, understanding how God sees me, how God looks at me, I still can enter into that calling in life and do the best that I can. So hopefully here, this can give you a little bit of a picture. I've noticed in life, as an example, I'm using this example because Daniel's going to be sharing something similar. I've worked with a lot of people, several people who have been through the prison system or been in jail. And one of the things that's been eye-opening for me personally is how hard it is to get a new beginning. If you've been in prison or you've been through jail, Because once you get out, a lot of times you can't drive. You've got that, if you have a felony, you have that label. It's placed on you, and you go anywhere to get a job, and you're defined. Not by where you are now, but where you were yesterday, okay? And I recognize that, and the people that I've worked through largely who have been in that position have shared with me how they got, this is a natural consequence. But at the same time, I recognize there's that balancing act. It also is hard to start over when the world is constantly looking at you and saying, felon. Or the world is constantly, look at the pictures up there, looking at you and saying, addict, alcoholic, Or you even have somebody who's lost a loved one. I talked about the grief share earlier. Your life can be defined by the fact that I lost my husband, or I lost my father, I did. Or, and every single day when you live your life, like I remember after my father died when I was 18, I went home, and I was constantly reminded that I was a son without a father. And if you've lost someone in your life, it's a constant reminder you're labeled, okay? So there's so many ways that you can be defined, and I mentioned another one up there as well. Sometimes not everybody has the best parental authority in their life, and so what oftentimes happens in abusive situations is parents will say things to their kids, horrible things, and it sticks forever. And it just takes a little thing to bring that out again, and deep down inside you may not acknowledge it, but you're still being defined by that abusive person and the words they used toward you. And this is why the words of 1 John 3:1 are so powerful. It says, see what kind of love the Father has given to us that we should be called children of God. And so we are. See what kind of love the Father has given to us. And ultimately, right after this, just a chapter later, it defines God's love as Jesus giving his life, God's Son, looking at you saying, I know how broken you are. I know you have that disease. I can see straight into your heart and say, yet I'm dying for you. That is unconditional love. That's God's love being poured out on you. And because of what Jesus did, he looks at you and he says, child, mine. That's who you are. And how do you know that is the truth and that's the case? What does it say? It says because he says it. That's the power of God. God made it says in the beginning of the Bible, and this is a whole other discussion, I get it, but it says God created the world by merely speaking it into being. And yes, if you have struggles with Genesis in the beginning of the Bible, I'd be happy to talk to you about that, but that's not the point. The whole point here is that the Bible says God speaks, and it happens, and he says, you are my child. And because of what my Son's done for you, that's who you are, through faith in him. So trusting in Jesus and the work that he's done for you, you can know how you are defined. Even when you're feeling horrible, even when, that's what I look at. Even when the world's coming after me. And I want to point out, again, what it says there, the next sentence, I stopped. It says, the reason why the world does not know us, the reason why the world does not look at me sometimes and say a child of God is because it does not know Jesus. That's the problem. The world has a different higher power frequently. The world is looking to success. It's looking primarily to what have you done for me lately? And that's how you're defined. Now, I recognize that it's important to grow. It's important to show change in your life, but unless you're first reminded every day of who you are and who God says you are, what's going to define you? The world. And whatever higher power, not Jesus, that is dictating your life, and it can be very dangerous. Without Jesus, others won't see me as God's child. This is what it says next. Beloved, we are God's children now. If you look in the mirror right now, imagine yourself doing that, would you see God's child? There are many days when it's like, as a pastor, I find myself looking in the mirror and I'm like, I'm a pastor. Look what I've done lately. I mean that when I say that disease plays out in my life. And that's why every day I need to look in the mirror and be reminded how God sees me. Okay? Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know that when he appears, when Jesus appears, we shall be like him because we shall see him as he is. What's being said here is right now, I can't see that reality. Just like the world, because the world, the culture, thinks Jesus is optional and doesn't believe in Jesus, it looks at me and says, and defines me in other ways. Okay? And I can't see it oftentimes because I'm hearing the world and I'm seeing myself through my own insecurities. But that doesn't mean that it's not true. It's an underlying, unseen reality that I am God's child. And it says one day, this is the amazing part. Get this in your head. One day, that unseen reality, I'm God's child, will be visible. And it says one day, Jesus, who I can't see right now, whose truths, even though I can't see them, are nonetheless true, such as I am forgiven. I can't see it. And sometimes even when I know that God forgives me, other people don't forgive me, and it's a struggle, but it's nonetheless true. And one day I will see it. Once again, another discussion, longer discussion to have, but a powerful one to just ponder a little bit. You will, through faith in Jesus, one day you will see yourself as God sees you. And you will see God as God is, not as you and I don't want to say you all the time, it makes it sound like I don't have. One day I will see God as he is rather than how I sometimes want him to be. One day the invisible will be made visible. Now this is my encouragement for you. So Jesus gave his life for me because of God's love poured out on me. I have hope, and I am reminded every day of who I am. And this is something Daniel's going to be sharing. I know he told me before we even started, he's like, I didn't have any direction in my life. And the whole point is he's looking all over the place. This is what he shared with me. He's looking all over the place. And it's when he set his eyes on Jesus, he had one fixed point, one higher power that would never fail him. And it changed things for him. It changed the way he looked at himself. And that's what he's going to be sharing with you in just a little bit. And I know that I can talk about these spiritual, unseen realities till I'm blue in the face. And you might say, well, that's great, but my circumstances haven't changed. But that's also why it's so important. And I've found this in my own life to be so important to do the following. Rest in God's promises. Hear his word. Hear what he says to me rather than focusing so much on what everybody else is saying sometimes and focusing so much on what those voices in my head are doing, because I play mind games with myself. You do that? I play mind games with myself all the time. So resting in when God promises me, because there's some things that God does not promise. And so it's important to not define God by the promises he has not made. And secondly, be active in a faith community, and this is why Genesis Community exists. I need a safe place where I can say, I have a disease. It's called sin. And this is how it plays out in my life. And it gets ugly at times. And it's so tempting so often to define myself by that disease, by that specific struggle. And yet when I look around this table at other people, I recognize I'm not by myself. And when I look around this table, I can also remember that there's other people who struggle with identity. Who am I? Who struggle with hope every single day. But I would say, most importantly of all, when you come to a community like this, you'll have people remind you of who God says you are. You're God's child. Just remember that. Don't ever forget that. Having an accountability partner that says that to you is huge. And having a community like this that can gather around you and encourage you is so powerful.